in the San Gabriel Valley. And now as we open your word, as we talk about what it means to love our city, we pray that you would give us ears to hear what the Spirit of God is saying to the church gathered here. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. All right, well, we're going to dive in kind of quickly today because you guys did a whole lot of talking. So we're going to, and that's awesome, and we are so appreciative for that. But our goal today is to have another conversation on this idea of what does it mean to love your city, loving the city that God has placed us in. And we start by realizing that cities are made up of communities of people. I know that's a fascinatingly profound statement. But cities are just what? Communities of people. They're your neighbors, right? All together. So we start with this idea that communities are people who God is always and ever seeking to love. And so if we're going to talk about loving our cities, we kind of start there. This is all a part of our continuing journey, and really it's an unending journey, to embody the reality that God's love is here, and God's love is present through His church, and God's love is near, and God's love is now, and available, wherever you might be. And that's the journey we've been on. That's the journey we're going to continue to be on, even as our kind of summer series, as it were, runs out in a few weeks. But this is a continuing, ever-present journey that we're going to be on. The Gospels, there are two instances. This is fascinating. 2 times in the Gospels, and I bet some of you could think of both instances where Jesus Christ. 2 times, right? In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those 4 books that record the stories of Jesus, there are 2 instances where Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is moved to tears. One of them happens to be the shortest verse of the Bible, correct? John 11, when Jesus' friend Lazarus dies, in John 11, verse 35, it simply says what? Jesus wept. That's it. 2 words. Jesus wept. He was moved to tears at the death of a friend. The other is when Jesus weeps over a city. And we find this in Luke 19, verse 41. When Jesus approaches Jerusalem, and it says, as Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. Which should cause us to pause for a minute, because I find it astounding that, not maybe astounding that Jesus is weeping over the death of a friend. Well, that's not too astounding. We've all done that. But that he actually weeps over this entire city. He knows and he sees the brokenness, perhaps, of the people who make up the city. And it deeply affects him. And what we see once again is that Jesus Christ perfectly reflects the heart of God, God's deep concern for the well-being of the people, the neighbors, us who make up our cities. And this should cause us to pause for a second. Jesus weeps over a city. Last week, we looked at how we should see, we were kind of just simply talking about how should we even see our city, our cities, because I know we come from various cities. How do we interact with the broader culture, as it were? And we specifically looked at 2 postures, like 2 prominent postures. I said that I was citing former president of Fuller Theological Seminary, Richard Nile, in an article he wrote where he talked about 2 prominent postures that American evangelical Christendom particularly has taken when it comes to engaging cities and engaging the broader culture. The first, we talked about these as 3 doors, if you'd like, if that makes some sense. The first door he speaks of is avoidance. So that's one posture that Christianity has taken in the West. We simply avoid mainstream culture. We then go and create a subculture, complete with its own music and clothing and bumper stickers and breath mints, right? So we create a subculture in an attempt to not be influenced by the broader culture, and so thus we avoid culture. The second door he talked about is we then attempt to take over mainstream culture. So this is the idea where if we can just vote the right people into power and get behind the right people, I call this the picketing and politicking door. If we can just get the right people in, if we can just pick at the right places, if we can kind of make a scene and get enough of us, maybe we can take over over. And those are the two doors that have kind of been offered. And yet studies show, and I think studies show an increasing and I think healthy aversion to these ways of seeing our cultural engagement within the church. This has led many to ask, is there another door? Is there perhaps a door number 3? Because let's be honest, the other two doors, where have they taken us? Where have the other two doors taken us? They've taken us, I think, into isolated irrelevance at best. We become isolationist and become irrelevant to the broader culture. And at worst, they've led to outright hostility and rejection. Because how does the average person in mainstream culture that makes up our cities, what do they think of? What do they feel when they hear the word Christian? When they hear the word evangelical Christian, what do they think of? Well, I'm glad you asked, because in his landmark study, Unchristian, Dan Kinnaman and the Barna Group did the research, they did the polling, and they came up with 5 or 6 general themes. And we've talked about these before, but here's what the average person in mainstream culture hears when they hear Christian: these 5 words: hypocritical, anti-homosexual, sheltered, political, and judgmental were the first 5 things that came to mind. That's what the research is telling us. That's what people are hearing. And so I propose that maybe door number 1 and door number 2 aren't working. If that's what people are hearing, if that's how people are responding. But it turns out the Bible does have another option that we looked at last week. It's the Jeremiah 29 option. In Jeremiah 29, we find another door. And wouldn't you know it, it's a door that's very counterintuitive, even subversive. It's a way of living and interacting with our cities, with the broader culture, that sometimes can even be a bit uncomfortable. But it is, I believe, a biblical way forward. Because in Jeremiah 29, the prophet tells tens of thousands of Hebrew exiles living as strangers in a strange land, living in a dominant culture which does not value its morals and religion and way of life. The prophet tells them to do 5 things. Door number 3, the prophet says, build a house, remember. Plant a garden. Make this city beautiful. You're going to be here a while. Start a family. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city, and ultimately to pray for the city. And I cannot tell you how counterintuitive those 5 things are. Because Jeremiah is writing to a group of people who is living under the oppression of the enemy. This is the problem. They are living within the culture where they're saying, this is what I do not want my children to become. If we could just get rid of them, then everything would be like it once was in the glory days back in Jerusalem. But the prophet says, oh, no. You've been planted here for a reason. There is a purpose for you here. And so this is what we're going to do. Because the temptation is, and this is kind of where we landed last week, the temptation for us is to build a fence and preserve and protect what we feel is in jeopardy because God doesn't, but the interesting thing is, God does not seem to be concerned with protecting and preserving what we think is in jeopardy. He actually, if you go back and read Jeremiah 29 again, and I believe verse 1, it actually says, I carried you into exile, says the Lord. This was his doing. He actually had carried them, which means that he's in complete control. And so while we may be tempted to feel like culture is spinning out of control, and I believe it's all relative to who's in complete control. And so actually we have nothing to fear. And we can plant a garden in the city, and we can settle down. We can seek the peace and prosperity of the city, and we can certainly pray for the city because he's in control, no matter what. Abigail ended last week with a challenge, and it's still visible over here, to lay down anything that keeps us building fences. Whether it's fear, whether it's control, the unknown, whatever it might be, we lay these things at the foot of the cross. Because what we want to be about is a church community. And I hope this gets loud and clear as we talk about these things week in and week out. We want to make something beautiful. We want to be about making something beautiful of God's creation, no matter how ugly it can seem at times. We aren't here to flee or to just simply prophetically rail against society, but I believe we are here to live a better, more compelling story within society. We're living a better story, and we offer a better way forward. We're going to make Babylon beautiful, aren't we? We encountered, we were, a week and a half ago, we were at the Vineyard National Conference, and we were encouraged by our national director of Vineyard Churches, Phil Strout, in a very moving talk by a number of things. But one of the lines that stuck with me, and one of the things that he encouraged us, is to become better listeners. It's interesting that Eric even brought that up, that he just felt like I needed to listen. And that was one of the things that we were encouraged, that as a church community, we need to become better listeners as we pursue this calling in our community. And he gave us, he had one quote that I want to put on the screen behind me, speaking to a room of thousands of Vineyard leaders. He said this: if you and I have $2 answers for $500 questions, then we have not listened well. I thought, that's so true. Sometimes, I mean, have you ever heard a $2 answer for a $500 question? Or it's just this easy. This is a very easy solution to some really big things, questions that perhaps people are asking or wrestling with. And I don't know about you, but I want to be the type of person, I want to live the type of life where my life is a $500 answer for some $500 questions that people in our cities and people in our community are asking. I think we already knew the importance of listening because, and God's already been speaking to us on this. Karen Fields a few weeks ago stood up here and did a whole kind of workshop with us when it came to loving our family well, about just becoming better listeners as we live in families. And so it seems like God is trying to say something to the broader church at large and also to our individual church here. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe there is a time to speak. I believe the church has a prophetic voice within our culture. But I think the speaking has to come after a lot of listening. And I think that when we do speak, what we're asking the Lord is, Lord, when we speak, may we have $500 answers because we've listened well. I want to show you a very quick case study in this idea of when it comes to engaging the city, when it comes to living here in this broader Southern California, San Gabriel Valley, mainstream culture here in Los Angeles County. How do we go about doing that? I want to use a case study in the book of Acts because Paul, the Apostle Paul, did this really, really well. Time after time after time, Paul engaged the city, and we could actually do a whole series looking through the book of Acts of how he did this. I just want to pick one chapter and one little section to show you how I believe Paul was not only a master at listening, Paul was a master at giving $500 answers to $500 questions. Because boy, did he get some. As you read through the book of Acts, you will find Paul did two things very well. Every time he entered a city, he did two things. He would always start by trying to understand the hopes and the dreams and also the idolatry, the idolatries of a particular city or region where he would go. In other words, the first thing Paul would try to do is understand the story. What's going on in this city? And in every city he went in, it would be slightly different. But he always kind of started by asking those kind of questions, figuring out, what are the hopes and dreams of the people here? What are the idols of the people living in this particular region? He would start there. And then the second thing he would do is he would declare and demonstrate the gospel in such a way that the city's hopes were reinterpreted and its idols were challenged. I call this telling a better story. He would understand their story and he'd say, wait, I understand your story. Can I tell you a more holistic, even better story than the one your city has already been living in? Let me show you this in the book of Acts. Chapter 17. I picked a city I think we would all know. Famous encounter Paul has in a city called Athens in Acts 17. We've all heard of Athens, correct? You remember this from world history and geography or whatever it might be. City of Athens. Paul ends up there in Acts 17, verse 16. And it says this: while Paul was waiting for them, that would be Paul and Timothy and Silas, his traveling companions, he was waiting for them in Athens. He was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So Paul has a little downtime, apparently. He's waiting for his traveling partners. He's here in Athens, Greece, and he can't help but noticing that Athens was a city that was just full of idols. I imagine, because this was already built, was it not? The Acropolis. That perhaps what he is noticing, as you can see this better, maybe he's seeing the Acropolis right there. This rocky outcropping, and sitting on top of the Acropolis, there's the Parthenon, correct? I mean, this is where the gods reside. The temple of Athena, there on top of the Acropolis as well. And he can't help but noticing all of this. So what does he do? Does he pick up a sign and write, "Thou shalt not worship idols," and start marching around the temple of Athena? No. That's not what he doesn't start to protest the idolatry. He just starts to talk with people. Verse 17. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus. They said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." You see, all the Athenians and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking and listening to the latest ideas. See, where does Paul begin to engage this city? This is amazing. He just goes about his normal day-to-day ministry. He just starts talking with people. It says he's in the synagogue speaking with religious Jews. He's in the marketplace, perhaps talking with idolatrous Gentiles, swapping stories, sharing his story, apparently, sharing the good news, talking about the resurrection of Jesus, because he understood some things about the people of Athens. He understood that the hopes and the dreams and also the idolatry within Athens was tied around one thing: knowledge. I mean, this was a city known for its pursuit of knowledge, was it not? This is where the great philosophers come from. People want to know. What is philosophy? The science of knowing. He knew that these people were hungry and thirsty for knowledge. And so what does he do? He just talks. Because what do the Athenians like to do? Sit around all day doing what? Talking about and listening to the latest ideas. You see, Paul understood the story of Athens. He just joined their story. It's what they like to do. And eventually, he's around so much, he's within the community so long, they eventually say, wait. We want to hear more about your story. What's this foreign god you're talking about? What is this resurrection of the dead? And then what Paul does is brilliant. He gives a $500 answer. Because they're asking $500 questions, aren't they? Like, well, tell us about this. What is this babbler saying? What are these foreign gods? And so what Paul does in the next verse, Paul stands up in the meeting of the Areopagus, and look what he says. "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." He's like, I get it. You are very, very religious people. I see that. He says, "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." So you see, he listened. He knew their deepest hopes. He knew their dreams. He even says, I've walked up. You even got this altar. It says, "To an unknown God." Because you're living in fear that there may in fact be a God that you don't know about. And so you might as well build him or her an altar just in case they really do exist in some way you're not appeasing them. He says, you even have a God like that. And then he goes on to challenge that in a very subtle way. Look what he says in verse 24. We'll end here. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. For though he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. This is brilliant because Paul, in a very subversive way, shares the gospel. He gives them another story. He gives these Athenian philosophers, he says, there is a God, actually. You talk about this unknown God, but let me tell you, there's a God who holds it all together. And he doesn't live in a temple built by human hands like all these temples, because the whole earth is his temple. The whole thing is his. He says, and this God who gives life and breath and everything else, he is not far off, which was their view of the gods. He is close, he is near, he is now. And he challenges that whole way of thinking. And then he even ends, this is fascinating, he's so culturally attuned to their story that he ends, did you notice, by quoting one of their Cretan poets, Epimenides, by saying, in him we live and move and have our being, which would basically be like me or Abigail quoting Drake or Taylor Swift, or I still have lost some of you, Bono. Getting older, Johnny Cash. Okay. I had to go right through the generations there. We are an intergenerational church. And he says that in this God we live and move and have our being. See, he listened to culture. He knew the city. He knew the hopes, the dreams, and the idols. And then what does he do? He presents the gospel in a more compelling way. He says, I know the story you've been living. Now let me present something that's even more compelling. A better story that connects all the dots. Because this is how you were created to live. This is what you've been searching to know. This is why you sit around talking about the latest fads and ideas, he says, your whole life. This is what you've been longing for. This is good news. Because if the gospel isn't good news, then why are we talking? So I wonder what this might look like if we were to fast forward a couple thousand years, talk about our own city. We don't have an Acropolis high up on a hill with the Parthenon, do we? Do we live in a city full of idols? Well, you better believe it. So what would this look like 2,000 years later? I think that would be a wonderful question to ask my wife. Abigail.
I wasn't expecting to.
Oh, I wrote.
Hello, check. Okay, I'm going to come down. So, yeah, we are going to really bring this home, no pun intended, and make this relevant to the cities that we live in. But I'm going to cause a little bit of a stir right now because I would like for everybody to stand up, please, if you are able. And what we are going to do is we are going to get into groups based on the city that you live in. Now, if your city is not represented here, no offense. We try to get most. Go to the nearest city.
Who's from Azusa?
So who's from Azusa?
Okay, so Azusa's going to sit over here.
Azusa's sitting over there.
Actually, yes. All right, so Karen, you guys can come up and join Azusa. All right. I know we're going to have a lot of this, probably. Glendora? Why don't we maybe we make 2 or 3 Glendora groups, so other Glendora. We put Doherty and Monrovia together. I think they're right in this section.
Okay, we have Laverne, Claremont.
San Dimas.
We'll put Laverne and Claremont over here. So if you have the sign, go ahead and hold it up.
Laverne.
So we have a Baldwin Park. Baldwin Park.
How about Laverne, San Dimas?
Chino Hill.
Sonia. Oh, you guys have Laverne. Oh, Laverne, Claremont, sorry. Covina.
Walnut Diamond Bar.
Covina. West Covina. Or near West Covina.
Inland Empire.
Inland Empire. Yeah, we just did Inland Empire.
We actually put a Lake Arrowhead.
I printed Lake Arrowhead for you guys.
Pomona. Do you have Pomona?
Nobody San Dimas?
Okay, yeah. Where's the thermos?
Right there.
Okay. You say no,
Manila?
we don't. We just want you to represent your.
So you want them sitting though with their?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Now go ahead and
Now you have to
figure out a way to get comfortable.
We'll find a seat with your people.
Almani. Right here. Yeah. Oh yeah, I do. Birthday Almani.
Yeah, I got love. Birthday Almani.
Take that back to them. Okay, figure out a way to get comfortable. Is everybody in a region? Everybody in a city group?
Join this group over here. Join these guys. Combine must be.
So,
Guys, join up with you.
so you might want to, I don't know, you can position yourself to turn around and be able to see, or sometimes just look to your back. For now, this is going to be Jacob gave us Paul's case study. We're going to actually do our own case studies as we explore our own cities, and again, make this very practical for us. So in our Love Is Now series, we have really pressed into this idea that if we're going to minister well to our neighbors, we need to know our neighbors, right? Like, we need to know them if we want to love them well. We have to get to know them, and really the same is with our city, and that was the point that Jacob was making, that if we want to love our city well, if we want to effectively minister to our city, then we really need to get to know it. And what I have seen oftentimes is that the church, kind of Big C church, it has a way of using kind of cookie cutter tactics and strategies for ministering to community that are not byproducts, natural byproducts of love and compassion for that city or that community. Have you seen that? Like, oh, well, if it worked in Arkansas, it'll work in Michigan. And that just always isn't the case, right? And unfortunately, what happens when we use these cookie cutter strategies is we have a way of maybe missing our community entirely. We don't hear it, we don't see it, we miss it entirely, and again, we give these $2 answers to $500 questions. And I believe this happens when we just don't make the effort to have a relationship with the people that we love, because relationship is what compels our compassion. Relationship compels compassion. I mean, think about it even in your own life. Maybe there was somebody that you had seen from a distance, maybe had some judgments, assumptions about, but you entered into relationship with them, and you got to know their story, and you got to know their lives, and compassion started to well up with you. Oh, maybe that's why they do it this way. Or maybe that's why they dress this way or act this way. It compels compassion, and compassion compels our response to them, right? And so I believe that the church, it is very good at doing a lot of good works. It's very good at that. But what the church seeks to do is to do kingdom work. And what kingdom work is, as opposed to just good works, is that kingdom work is the overflow of the love of God in our lives that pours out and spills out and spreads out all of our community. That's kingdom work, church. A lot of times I think we misrepresent sometimes what we're doing, and good works are great. But again, kingdom work is the overflow. It's the overflow of the heart of Jesus. And it's love, it's the overflow of love that, like what we see in Jesus, steps into humanity, right? It gets to know names. It gets to know stories. It goes over to people's houses for meals. It establishes relationships. And then it responds accordingly. That's what we see in Jesus. It responds according to that. So let's agree together as a church, maybe even in this morning, let's agree together to spend less time exploring strategies and tactics for growing the kingdom, and more time committed to listening to our neighbors, listening to the cities that we live in. Can we agree to that together? Because that's where the kingdom is going to emerge. That's where the overflow is going to come. It's not just going to come in tactics and strategies. We want to have responses to our neighbors, to our city, to our community that are compelled by compassion. Compelled by compassion. So if we're going to effectively minister to our city, then we have to know what the story of our city is. And that's why I had you break up into small groups, because maybe you've never thought about this before. Maybe you've never actually sat down and put it into words. What are the hopes of my city? What are the dreams of my city? How about the values? Or like Jacob spoke about, the idolatries. Certainly we have idolatries within our cities. What are the fears? So as a starting point to just begin to explore this, I think it's good to assess maybe what the overarching storyline of our city is. And usually that can be summed up in maybe one or two words. And there is a book that is a really good book that Jacob and I glean a lot from, and it's called Why Cities Matter. And actually, we reference it in the Week 7 newsletter, so please pick it up. It's called Why Cities Matter by Justin Buzzard and Stephen and actually, they synthesized in this book some of these overarching storylines to some of the major cities in the world. So I thought it would be fun to share those with you, just to start to generate your thinking and get your wheels turning. So for instance, if we think of Paris, right? The overarching storyline for Paris, we could say, is romance, right? Many of you think of Paris, oh, it's about romance. Or when we think of Las Vegas, perhaps the overarching storyline of Las Vegas is pleasure. Or San Diego, which is where I grew up, they say health. Health is an overarching storyline of San Diego, which I would probably agree with. It seems like everybody exercises in San Diego. Or New York, they assess is success. That New York is very success-driven. So let's see if you can guess some of these. What do you think Los Angeles is? The overarching storyline of Los Angeles? Entertainment. That would, yeah. I think that could be definitely one of them. They say image. Okay. Washington, D.C. Power. San Francisco. Love, yeah. Equality. Say equality. Okay, for all my Filipino brothers and sisters, what do you think they assess Manila is? Hospitality is good. Isn't that kind of like the slogan? No, it's actually opportunity. They said opportunity. So I don't know, maybe you would resonate with that or not. But what happens when we know the overarching storyline of our city is that we are better able to assess and address the needs and the values and the desires of the people that live there, because all cities are a bunch of people who gather kind of in the same space and choose to call it home. That's all that cities are. And so it helps us to address what the needs of the people are that live there. And again, it also begins to steer us away from these cookie cutter responses, programs, activities, and it moves us into the realm of compassionate responses, because that's what we're seeking. We're seeking, just like Eric sharing his story, that as he listened, what came forth was what? It was compassion. It was a compassionate response. It wasn't a response that was just a knee-jerk reaction based on assumptions, judgment. Oh, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. No, it was, let me hear from you, let me know you, now let me respond to you. So this is what I want to do in our groups. I want to discuss among our groups, what are some key words that you believe tell your city's story? So again, maybe one or two words. What are some key words that you believe tell your city's story? If you have a large group, I would say go ahead and break up to like groups of 3 or 4, just so it's not crazy. And then we'll reconvene. So I'm only going to give you a couple minutes to do this, not too long. So go.
Almani, it's broken. It's I guess if you use another word, maybe. I mean, we're culturally a diverse city now. I mean, a lot more than it used to be. But what's happening is that the people in are sort of like divided, so to speak. And a lot more people are coming into where you can't really talk between each other because you understand everyone else is yeah, I'm like, if she puts up working on money, I'm like, there's no way you're married. Fall apart. Right? I was like, I'm like, okay, well, interesting.
Okay, let's bring this back together. I told you I'd only give you a couple minutes. So I want you to call out, just call out maybe what your city is, and maybe one word. And again, this is kind of the, I think Joy said it well, like it's the taking the big step back and seeing the overarching story, and then some of those that begins to come clear. So maybe just say your city and maybe one or two words that you think are part of the overarching storyline. Okay. Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Glendora, she said sheltered and changing. Okay. Family oriented.
Safe.
Safe for Glendora. Tradition for Glendora. Money. Glendora. What about another city?
Azusa.
We said heritage.
Azusa, heritage.
You're looking at me?
Sure.
Well, we're Almonte and La Puente. That's the group that got put together. I guess we just said Almonte. It's kind of sad at the moment. It seems to be broken and sectioned.
So broken and sectioned. Maybe from our Claremont.
Our Claremont area, they have a slogan saying it's the city of PhDs and trees. And I feel like that kind of sums it up, like knowledge, education, and the environment.
Claremont knowledge, education, environment. Good. What about you guys here?
Monrovia, we said movie facades.
Monrovia is what?
Movie facades.
Movie facades? Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, Sonia, Laverne?
We had 4 for Laverne: retirement, mixed ethnically, family, and competition of sports.
Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, Lake Arrowhead.
The great outdoors.
Great outdoors. There you go. Yeah. So, yeah, you know, when we begin to identify these, we start to see kind of this bigger story at work, right? So I'll use Glendora as a little bit of my own case study, since that's where I live in my hometown, but I can't help but think of this image. Jacob, put it up. Welcome to Glendora, pride of the foothills, right? We see that when we're driving through Glendora, pride of the foothills. And really, I think that sometimes people from outside of Glendora, that's how they see it, a little bit pretentious, a little bit prideful, you know, and we put it right there on our slogan for the city, so in some ways we admit it. Other words that I would use that I definitely heard from this circle over here for Glendora would be safety, prosperity, and tradition. I think prosperity is the same as money. So again, using Glendora as an example, if we were to look at safety, prosperity, tradition, we would say, I think that there's really nothing intrinsically wrong with any of those, right? Those are all good values, things that we would want. There's nothing wrong with it, but what happens with our hopes and values is that we have a way of turning them into idols. They can become something that we are putting our hope into, and that's what makes them an idol. We can begin to bow down to those things before we bow down to God. And we can misunderstand our idols to become something that can do something for us or provide something for us that simply cannot. Like idols just will never quite satisfy that hope or that dream or the desire, they can't come good on the promises that they provide. And when this happens, what we end up doing is we take the gospel story out of the story of our cities. Because what the gospel story does is it always centers us around Jesus as our only hope, as our only satisfier, as our only protector. It takes Jesus out of the story. So for example, we would say there's nothing wrong with desiring prosperity, but when we begin to value accumulating wealth or resources or toys or material goods more than our ability to be generous, right? The gospel is now taken out of the story of prosperity. Or we would say there's nothing wrong with desiring safety. We all want to be in safe neighborhoods and safe communities, but when our desire for safety is our excuse for becoming exclusive, or keeping people out, or keeping people on the margins, we take the gospel narrative of inclusion, of welcoming in, of bringing in all of the outsiders and caring for the stranger. We take that gospel narrative out of the story. You see how we do that when our values and our hopes and our dreams become our idols. So idols have a way of destroying our lives and the lives around us because, again, they're incapable of making good on their promises. It's why some of the most unhappy people can be the wealthiest people, right? Wealth does not equal happiness. It does not equal joy. So let's just take a brief minute in our group and maybe call out with each other what maybe some of the idols of your communities may be. Maybe it's image, as Shamir said, maybe it's power, or maybe it's money. But it's important to identify these. Otherwise, if we don't, we will give $2 answers for $500 questions. We will not address the deepest needs of our community or deepest hopes of our community. So, like 1 minute, maybe call those out to each other. Go. Begin to call out some of those words. You don't have to tell us your city, but maybe just call out what you assess are some of those idols. Call them out. Yeah?
We mentioned, or it was brought up, how there's like a great division in Azusa between the APU community and then like the actual Azusa community.
So, divisiveness or, division.
It's like almost like two different cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good grades if you're part of the student body.
Okay. She said good grades, like within students in Glendora. Anybody else?
The classes in Monrovia, you've got people who live above Butchell, and you've got
Classism. Yeah, do you live north or south of it? Oh, that's a common question I know for Glendorans too. Yeah, Michael. Prejudice?
people who like tradition that new people moving in either you don't fit a certain, whether it's like bracket, like where you come from, your money, what you look like
prejudice based on the desire to uphold and maintain tradition. Like we don't want to threaten that. We don't want to change that. Anybody else? Call out.
Housing, bringing money and more population in. In our area where we live towards West Covina, they just built new houses, like a gated community, and it's in right next to the I don't know how can I say it, like the dam, where the river overflows goes, and that's a place that I would never picture a house community there, but just because of the money that's coming in and people buying the houses and all that, it's just and it's just getting overcrowded.
So my experience in the short while that I've been here, I've experienced generosity.
Generosity. So that's a good segue into our final movement before we're done this morning. But that's what we are seeking to do, is we want to retell our city's story in light of the gospel. That's what we're seeking to do, is retell it in light of the gospel, because it's to that end that we will seek to participate in compassionate kingdom work and the work of transformation in our community. That's what we do as Christ followers. And as Jacob articulated when he used Paul as a case study, that Paul didn't come in and just threaten hopes and dreams and challenge them and rebuke them. What he did is he just came in and provided a more complete story. And the more complete story was the narrative or the story of their city or their town through the lens of the gospel. That's the more complete story. It was the reminder that only in God do we live and move and have our being. That's the complete story. That because of God, we this. Because Jesus, we get to that, right? That's the more complete story. So for example, when we look to God for our safety and we acknowledge that our lives are in God's hands and that God's power, God's authority is ultimately responsible to guard our lives, then we are much more apt to welcome others in, right? We don't need to be so exclusive. People don't remain a threat to us because ultimately it's God's responsibility to safeguard our lives, right? God is our refuge and our strength, our very present help in trouble. Or when we acknowledge that every good gift comes from God, because we are free now to give generously. We can give fearlessly. We can give freely, trusting that as we do that, we get to participate in the gospel story, the gospel narrative, the gospel story. Even in Scripture, if you look at Deuteronomy 8:17, verses 18, God says, "You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today." When we lose sight that it is God who gives you the ability to be prosperous, we have now taken the gospel out of the story. Or we have traditions, right? And they're good. But we have traditions because God lovingly puts us in families and God puts us in communities. And he calls us to times of remembrance, and those are all very good things. It's part of God's redemptive plan that we are in relationship with one another and that we value all the benefits of that. And so we look at it through the gospel lens and we see that we need not keep people on the margins. Actually, it's this great opportunity to welcome and invite people in because it's God who puts us in communities. It's all a gift. Right? It's God who puts us into families, and we want that. We desire that for all of creation. Excuse me, I have way too many things on here. I'm going to start dropping things. Oops. Okay. So we need to wrap up. We don't really have time to go through our next question together, but maybe write it down, because I would encourage you to think about this in your own time. What I would like for you to do is I would like for you to take some time to retell your city's story in light of the gospel. So those things that you have identified, whether they're the hopes, the dreams, the values, the visions, the fears, the idolatries, seek to retell those stories in light of the gospel. Seek to see it under the authority of King Jesus. You know, we put this in the newsletter as just if you have children, a fun conversation with your kids. If Jesus were king of my city, what would it look like? What would the values be? What decisions would Jesus make? How would Jesus rule and reign? Because, church, as kingdom people, that's what we seek in our cities. We seek the rule and reign of King Jesus. And we are part of that kingdom. We are people of that kingdom as Christ's followers. This is the way we are invited to live out the stories, the hopes, and the dreams and the values of our cities. And as a church, it's important for us, we keep going back to this over and over and over again, that we are corporately listening together. That we're doing this in the context of our community here. That we're listening to the stories because, again, as a church, we don't want cookie-cutter responses or $2 responses. We want to be able to compassionately respond, empathetically respond, so that our answers match the gospel narrative, that they're directly connected to the gospel narrative, which represents the deepest needs and desires of our community. So let's just do this. Let's end this way. How about in your groups, maybe if there's one or two people that will pray a blessing over your city, and the rest of you in your group can just agree along with them. But if you'd be willing to pray a blessing over your city, and also just pray, let me pray a blessing over you. First, you pray a blessing over your city after, and then we get to go out from this place and live this out, which is exciting to me. So let me pray a blessing over you, and then you all can close in your circles. So, Holy Spirit, we thank you for the invitation that you give us to be kingdom people, people that come under a different kind of governance, a governance where generosity flows, and welcoming the stranger is one of our ultimate goals, where we get to help those in need, and where we don't have to safeguard our lives, because, God, you are so much better at safeguarding our lives than any walls or fences that we could ever build up around us. So, God, thank you for the freedom that we experience in that story. And, God, may we be a kingdom people that fervently welcome others into it, that speak to the deepest needs of our community, that is completely infiltrated with the gospel. Not judgments, not assumptions, not just mediocre conclusions that we come up with that do not answer the deepest needs of our communities. But may it be filled with the gospel story that is so satisfying and so freeing and so compelling. So, God, would you fill this church with your power and your presence? Would you bless this church with every spiritual gift it needs to go from this place and to represent who you are and what you are like? In Jesus' name, amen.